It was just past 7 in the morning when officers were called to an apartment on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The sun was barely breaking through the skyline when the first patrol car arrived, sirens fading into the distance as neighbors peered from behind their curtains. Inside, what they found would stay with them for years. On the marble floor of a luxury apartment lay a young woman, lifeless, silent, far from home. Her name was Maria Isabel Santos. She was 19 years old, a university student from the Philippines. She had come to New York full of hope, full of dreams, and full of trust in the people who promised to help her find success. But the man who claimed to be her mentor, the one who said he'd guide her, was nowhere to be found. Before investigators even began, the story had already become something else, a question. How could a girl so full of promise end up here, in a city that promised everything? The police sealed off the apartment as detectives entered, flashlights cutting through the half-darkness. Everything was neat, almost too neat. The bed was made. The counters were wiped clean. The scent of perfume lingered faintly in the air, as if she had just been getting ready to go somewhere. Her phone was on the bedside table, but the screen was cracked. Nearby, a glass of water half full, a single lipstick mark on the rim. It didn't look like a struggle. It looked like a disappearance interrupted. But within hours, whispers began spreading, about who she was seen with, about a man who had money, influence, and access. Someone who wasn't supposed to be part of her world. His name was Marcus Wellington. To those who knew him, he was charming, well-spoken, and generous. To Maria, he was an opportunity, or so she thought. The moment detectives found his name in her phone records, the search widened. Calls at odd hours. Transfers labeled scholarship support. Photos that didn't quite look like mentorship. And somewhere buried in that data, the start of a story no one was ready for. Who was Marcus Wellington, really? Why did Maria trust him so deeply? What did investigators find on his laptop that sent shockwaves through the city? And how many others were there? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Maria's story began far from the glittering lights of New York, in the warm, crowded streets of Manila, where the sound of jeepneys filled the air and children played barefoot in the rain. She was her parents' only daughter, the first in her family to earn a scholarship abroad. Her father worked as a mechanic. Her mother sold home-cooked food to neighbors. When Maria received her acceptance letter from Columbia University, her parents wept, tears of joy, but also of fear. They were sending their child into a world they could barely imagine. The day she left, the whole neighborhood came to the airport to say goodbye. Her mother wrapped her in a tight embrace, whispering prayers into her hair. "Remember who you are," she said. "And remember, no dream is worth losing yourself for." Maria smiled, nodding, unaware that those words would one day echo back to her in ways no one could predict. In New York, she found herself overwhelmed at first, the noise, the pace, the endless crowds. But she was determined. She studied business and digital media, often staying up late in the library. Her professors described her as bright, driven, and deeply kind. Her classmates said she was the kind of person who remembered everyone's name. She shared a small apartment with 2 other students near Harlem. Life was tight, but she managed. She took part-time shifts at a coffee shop, sent money home when she could, and posted cheerful photos online, captions like "living the dream," 1 cup of coffee at a time. To her family, she was thriving. To her friends, she was glowing. But the truth was, Maria carried a heavy weight. The cost of living, the pressure to perform, the loneliness of being far from home, it was all catching up to her. She was proud, though. She never asked for help. That's when she met him. It happened one evening at the university library. Her laptop had frozen while she was finishing an assignment. Frustrated, she muttered under her breath, and that's when a voice from across the table said, "Need a hand?" She looked up and saw a man, older, well-dressed, maybe in his early 40s. He smiled kindly, gesturing toward the screen. Sometimes these old machines just need a patient touch. He fixed the problem in minutes. She thanked him, laughing in relief. He introduced himself as Marcus Wellington, a visiting lecturer in economics and a consultant for several global firms. He told her he admired students like her, the ones who worked hard for everything they had. That night, he walked her out of the library. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed often, or so it seemed. He'd wave when he saw her on campus, stop for coffee, offer advice about career opportunities. Eventually, he offered to mentor her. "I see something in you, Maria," he said, "and I'd like to help you reach your full potential." At first, she was hesitant, but his presence was comforting. He seemed safe, confident, trustworthy. When he introduced her to his circle of friends, lawyers, entrepreneurs, professors, she felt like she was stepping into the life she'd always dreamed of. Their meetings grew more frequent. Dinners at expensive restaurants, invitations to charity events, small gifts, a watch, a new phone, even a designer bag. When her roommate asked where she was getting them, Maria brushed it off, saying it was just a mentorship benefit. But soon something changed. Her friends began noticing that she was pulling away. She stopped coming to study groups. She deleted old photos. When asked how she was, she'd say she was fine, always fine. Yet the sparkle in her eyes had dimmed. By January 2024, Maria's world looked completely different. She had moved into an apartment in the Upper East Side, the same one where detectives would later find her. Her tuition was suddenly paid in full. Her wardrobe transformed overnight. And Marcus began introducing her to people she barely knew, calling her his protégé. He called her often, too often. He wanted to know where she was, who she spoke to, what time she went to bed. When she missed a call, he'd show up unannounced, smiling as if nothing was wrong. One evening, her roommate confided to a friend, "I think Maria's in trouble. She doesn't sound like herself anymore." But Maria brushed it off. "He's just protective," she said quietly. "He wants the best for me." Protection soon turned into possession. And as her isolation deepened, so did the distance between who she was and who she was becoming. If you're still watching, type, "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's following this far. Because what happens next will change everything. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Sunday morning. Maria's roommates hadn't heard from her in 2 days. Unusual for someone who always checked in, even when busy. Her messages were short, clipped, and oddly formal. Then they stopped entirely. One roommate, worried, went to her new apartment, but no one answered the door. The next day, the building manager let them in. That was when everything unraveled. The police were called at 7:03 a.m. Officers arrived within minutes. Inside, there was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no overturned furniture. Just silence. And Maria. Detectives began piecing together her final 48 hours. The last confirmed sighting was on security footage from a high-end restaurant in Midtown. She was with Marcus. He was leaning close to her, whispering something as she smiled faintly. But her eyes told a different story. She looked tired, detached, as if somewhere else entirely. From that night on, Marcus disappeared. His phone went dead. His apartment, empty. His office cleared out. Every trace of him carefully erased. The case quickly drew attention. A young student from abroad, found lifeless in an expensive apartment. Her last companion, a wealthy older man who seemed to have vanished into thin air. The media was relentless. But the truth was, investigators had little to go on. There were no fingerprints besides hers. The cameras in her building? Disabled that night. The neighbors? Heard nothing unusual. At first, detectives considered the possibility of self-harm. But the forensic report told a different story. There were inconsistencies, details that didn't fit. Bruising on her wrist. A small puncture mark near her arm. Traces of an unknown sedative in her system. Someone had been there. Someone who knew what they were doing. The police began digging into Marcus Wellington's background. They found fragments, a LinkedIn profile, some old photos, business registrations that led nowhere. Every lead dissolved into digital fog. It was as if the man never existed. Until one detective noticed something. A pattern of transactions linked to a shell company in Singapore. From there, they traced payments made to several young women around the world. Los Angeles, Paris, Seoul, and Manila. Each labeled mentorship stipend. That's when the truth began to surface. Behind the charming facade, Marcus Wellington was a mask, a persona used by someone else entirely. The real man behind it had changed names multiple times, operated under false identities, and used money to control, exploit, and silence. He had perfected the art of erasure. Investigators discovered that Maria had recently tried to distance herself. 2 weeks before her death, she had told a friend she was done with him. She said she'd found something she shouldn't have. The friend didn't ask what it was, but Maria's tone was clear. She was scared. That same night, she sent herself an encrypted email, one that was never opened. Inside her apartment, officers found her laptop, partially wiped. but the forensic team was able to recover fragments of deleted data. Among them, folders named projects, donors, and one labeled Wellington. Inside, screenshots of conversations, bank transfers, and a list of names. The names belonged to women, young, foreign, vulnerable, just like her. Detectives realized Maria had been documenting everything. She had started saving evidence months before, perhaps realizing what kind of person Marcus really was. And she might have paid the price for it. The discovery changed everything. What began as a single mysterious case was now part of something much larger, an international web of deceit, control, and power. In the days that followed, her family flew in from the Philippines. Her mother could barely speak. "She wanted to help us," she whispered through tears. "She just wanted to make us proud." Her father stood silently beside her, gripping her photo, as reporters called out questions he couldn't bear to answer. The vigil that night drew hundreds. Students, professors, and strangers filled the street outside Columbia University, holding candles and photos of Maria. The wind carried the sound of a single violin. Someone read her favorite quote aloud. "To live without fear is the truest form of freedom." But even in that moment of unity, one question remained unanswered. Who was Marcus Wellington really? A week later, investigators finally found their first real lead. A laptop, recovered from a storage unit in Queens, registered under one of Marcus's aliases. Inside it were hundreds of encrypted files, some labeled with initials, others with coded dates. As they decrypted them, what they uncovered was darker than anyone expected. Dozens of profiles, photos, financial records, conversations spanning years, and then Maria's name. It was clear she was not his first target, nor his last. Every folder told a story of manipulation. Women promised mentorship, travel, tuition support, only to be controlled, monitored, and used. He had built an empire of deceit, powered by charm and money. And somehow, Maria had uncovered it. The agents working the case believed she had planned to expose him. She'd scheduled a meeting with a journalist the same week she disappeared. But she never made it. By this point, the case had gone global. Interpol joined in. Leads stretched across London, Singapore, and Dubai. Each identity they traced brought them closer to understanding how Marcus operated, and how carefully he hid. Maria's friends refused to let her name fade into another headline. They created a campaign, #JusticeForMaria, which quickly went viral. Donations poured in. Journalists reopened cold cases that seemed eerily similar. Slowly, the image of Marcus Wellington began to crumble, revealing the man behind the mask, and the world he had built around lies. But no one expected what investigators would find next. The files that would expose a pattern of exploitation far beyond anything they had imagined. And what Maria discovered on his laptop, before she died, would become the key to bringing his entire network to light. Stay with me, because in the next part, the case takes a turn no one saw coming. When digital forensics cracked the final layer of encryption on that laptop, the silence in the room was heavy. Investigators sat around the screen, not quite ready for what they were about to see. One folder, marked only with a single letter, M, opened to reveal hundreds of files. Some were receipts, others messages. But it wasn't just about Maria. It was about many others. Each file was like a window into a hidden world. Names of young women from across the globe, their faces smiling in selfies, their emails filled with hope. Every story began the same way: mentorship, support, opportunity. And every story ended abruptly, replaced by silence. Detectives realized Marcus Wellington wasn't just a con artist. He was part of something coordinated, systematic. A network that targeted women with ambition and dreams, and used that hope to control them. Maria had pieced it together before anyone else. In her recovered journal entries, investigators found her thoughts, notes written at odd hours. "He's not who he says he is. There's something bigger here. I have to get out." The words hit like a confession and a warning all at once. She had seen the danger coming. In one entry, she described the night she first grew suspicious. Marcus had taken a call during dinner, speaking in another language. She caught fragments, numbers, dates, names she didn't recognize. When she asked, he smiled and said it was just business. But something in his tone changed. That night, she couldn't sleep. She began saving everything: screenshots, receipts, voice notes. It was Maria's quiet bravery that would eventually bring his entire empire into the light. Investigators traced payments linked to Marcus through multiple offshore accounts. The same transfers that funded his lavish lifestyle were tied to shell corporations that financed false scholarships and fake modeling agencies. Each one connected back to a single real person, David Chin Morrison. The name surfaced in connection with financial crimes years before: fraud, identity theft, and alleged exploitation. But each time, he vanished before charges stuck. He was a master of reinvention, a chameleon who wore the face people wanted to trust. Marcus Wellington was just his latest disguise. In one of Maria's final text exchanges with her best friend back home, she wrote, "I think I found out who he really is. I just need to be careful." That was 3 days before she died. The discovery of the laptop changed the investigation's tone completely. The task force expanded, pulling experts from cybercrime units across states. They began mapping every alias, tracing connections to similar unsolved cases. In one, a French student named Amélie vanished in 2019 after meeting a mentor online. In another, a Korean exchange student reported being followed before she fled home. The pattern was undeniable. For the first time, detectives could see the shape of the entire operation. Dozens of victims, multiple continents, all connected by one man's deceit. But amidst all this, Maria's role stood apart. She wasn't just another victim. She had been the one who dared to document him, to gather proof when everyone else had been too afraid or too trusting. She had left a digital trail that became his undoing. Detective Michael Torres, who led the task force, later described that moment. She fought back in the only way she could, by writing everything down, by saving evidence. She knew something might happen to her, and she wanted us to know the truth if it did. The final weeks of Maria's life, reconstructed through messages, told a story of courage wrapped in quiet fear. Her tone grew distant in chats with friends. She began withdrawing from social gatherings. In one voice note, her voice trembled slightly. "He doesn't like when I don't answer right away. He says it's for my safety. But I don't feel safe anymore." The realization hit hard. She had been trapped, not by physical chains, but by emotional and psychological ones, carefully built by someone who understood control. Then came her final phone call. It was the night before her death. She called her friend Carla around 11:47 p.m. The call lasted just under 4 minutes. The words were fragmented, but clear enough. She said she planned to confront Marcus, that she couldn't live like this anymore. She said she'd found proof of what he'd done, and that she was going to bring it to the police the next day. That was the last time anyone heard her voice. When investigators found that call record, it felt like a punch to the chest. Maria had been so close, one night away from exposing him. The deeper they dug, the clearer the truth became. Marcus Wellington, the charming entrepreneur, didn't exist. David Chin Morrison did, a man with a long trail of deception stretching back over a decade. He had created fake businesses, false mentorship programs, and even used AI-generated photos to build credibility online. Everything about him was a performance, and Maria was the one who saw through it. The FBI took over, launching a multi-agency operation. Raids across several states uncovered servers, forged IDs, and documents linking Morrison to offshore accounts. Dozens of victims came forward, many describing similar experiences, a promise of help that turned into isolation and fear. But even as evidence mounted, Morrison himself was gone. He had slipped out of the country weeks before the warrant was issued. His last known location, Istanbul. After that, the trail went cold. Maria's case became the cornerstone of an international investigation. Her evidence, the files she'd collected, exposed a global pattern of exploitation. Governments issued joint statements, promising reform. Scholarships were reviewed. Programs were audited. But for those who knew her, the victory felt hollow. Justice, though close, had not truly arrived. In the months that followed, Columbia University established a scholarship in her name, the Maria Santos Fellowship for Women in Global Studies. Her family returned to the Philippines, their hearts heavy but proud. Her mother said softly, she was brave. Even when she was afraid, she told the truth. The story became a symbol of courage, of vulnerability, and of the dangers that hide behind polished smiles. Still, one haunting question remained. If Maria had never found those files, how many more would have fallen for Marcus's lies? Her name became a rallying cry, but her absence was a wound that never healed. As the investigation continued, detectives began piecing together one final puzzle, a series of offshore transactions that led to a small account in the Cayman Islands. The beneficiary name was erased, but the initials matched perfectly: DCM. David Chin Morrison, the man who had vanished before sentencing. And what investigators uncovered next, the final piece of his identity, would shock even those who thought they'd seen it all. The moment the name David Chin Morrison hit the case file, everything changed. Suddenly, this wasn't just a tragic death in New York. It was the exposure of a man who had lived many lives, all built on deceit. Morrison had posed as a tech investor, a philanthropist, even a visiting lecturer. Every alias had a new accent, a new passport, a new backstory. It was as if he existed only through the people he manipulated. Through months of investigation, agents discovered that he had used a network of stolen identities to open multiple businesses, each serving as a front for transferring money overseas. The same businesses he once bragged to Maria about mentoring young talent through. But those weren't mentorships. They were traps disguised as opportunities. When the FBI released Morrison's photo to the public, calls began flooding in. Women from across the country recognized his face. Some had known him as Marcus, others as Daniel, Chris, or Vincent. They all shared one thing, a story that started with charm and ended with fear. As the magnitude of the case became clear, the media swarmed. Headlines spread across major networks. International fraud ring exposed after death of Filipino student. Commentators debated how someone so dangerous could live undetected for so long. People asked why no one had stopped him earlier. But amid all the noise, one thing stood out: the courage of one young woman who refused to stay silent. Maria's story became the heart of the investigation. The files she had saved, the evidence she had left behind, were now the foundation of multiple indictments. Every note she wrote, every screenshot she captured, became a piece of justice that others had been denied. Detective Michael Torres stood before the cameras during a press conference, his voice steady but heavy. Without Maria's documentation, this case would have never reached this far. She left us a map, and that map led to the truth. In the courtroom, prosecutors presented months of evidence. They played recordings, displayed the documents Maria had saved. Each piece painted a clearer picture of who Marcus, or David, truly was. The audience watched in silence. Mothers wiped tears from their eyes. Journalists scribbled notes. But Morrison was not there. He had fled before sentencing. His attorney claimed he feared for his life, that he had received threats. Investigators, however, believed otherwise. They tracked his movements through international flight data. His last verified location was a small airport in Greece. Then nothing. To this day, his name remains on the international wanted list. But for Maria's family, it was never about his capture. It was about her legacy. Months later, in a candlelight vigil held at Columbia University, hundreds of students gathered. Some had known her personally. Others had simply heard her story. A line of candles illuminated the steps of Low Library, flickering under the night breeze. Her favorite song played softly in the background. "You Are the Reason." Her mother spoke through tears, her voice gentle yet strong. Maria wanted to make a difference. Maybe she didn't know how much she already had. The vigil ended in silence. But that silence wasn't emptiness, it was unity. A moment that connected everyone who had ever lost someone to trust misplaced. In the following months, new policies were introduced at major universities to ensure mentorship programs were verified, transparent, and safe. Scholarships created in Maria's name began offering real opportunities to women across Southeast Asia, legitimate ones, with real mentors and safeguards in place. Maria's story was no longer just a tragedy. It became a warning and a light. Even years later, people still visit her online memorial page. Strangers leave comments. "You inspired me to stay strong. I wish the world had treated you better. We remember you, Maria." And perhaps that is where her story finds its peace. Not in the courtroom, not in the headlines, but in the hearts of those who listen and learn. Because behind every story like Maria's, there's a question that refuses to fade. How many others are out there, waiting for someone to believe them? And maybe that's the lesson we're meant to take, that silence protects no one. Before we end this story tonight, let's take a moment to reflect. What would you have done if you were Maria? Would you have been brave enough to confront the truth, even when it was dangerous? If this story moved you, hit the like button and share it, because her story deserves to be heard. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? We'd love to know. For more true stories of power, betrayal, and justice, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the truth, no matter how deeply hidden, always finds its way to light.